All right, guys, welcome back to the Sex and Bacon podcast. On today's episode, I have with me Riley Molinario, and we're going to talk about a couple different things today. So I'm excited for you to be on here, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I absolutely love what it is that you do. It is beautiful, it's open, it's connective. So I'm really, really excited to be a part of it. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I love it. It's funny, like, you don't realize sometimes the reach that you have in having these conversations. Like, you're in the UK, right? So it's like in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm in Canada. Some people, like, here listen, or maybe US, but you don't realize how far, doing a podcast and talking about sex, what your reach is. And like, that's the part I think that's like amazing about it is because people all over the world can really hear what other people are talking about and hear the same struggles that they're going through and hear different perspectives and learn things from people all over the world and share things from different places all over the world. So I think that's amazing. So, yeah, for everybody listening, if you don't mind, can you just give us a little bit of background about what it is that you do and kind of how, you got started in everything that you're doing?
Absolutely. So I am an expert love educator and a relationship intelligence expert. So I know all about relationships, sex, the way that we connect, the way that we communicate. And this became extremely important to me because I come from an abusive background with a lot of trauma. And so for many years, I didn't have a wonderful relationship with myself. I didn't have wonderful relationships with other people. And I was able to create this amazing life on the outside with a house and a car and
Hmm.
money and a university degree and all of those amazing things, but on the inside I was suffering. And so I went on this mission and I was determined to create an amazing life for myself with healthy, thriving relationships, starting with a relationship with myself and then extending that to relationships with other people. And along my journey, I realized that there were a lot of people suffering from mental health issues and broken relationships and generational trauma, generational ignorance. And I said, this is my mission. This is my
Hmm.
mission to share this information with the world. We have been able to study relationships on a scientific level. We do have a very concrete formula for success, which is really exciting. It's very hopeful. But a lot of people are struggling because they don't have access to this information. And so my mission has become to share this beautiful information, all of these tools and techniques that we have so that people can create thriving relationships and ultimately thriving lives.
Hmm. That's amazing. I love that you took that on as, your purpose and your mission because I think that it's so true, right? Like everybody has this idea of what a relationship is going to look like, and you grow up seeing this dream life of what's put out there for people to see of like expectation. But the reality is people really don't actually have that as their reality because of how much we struggle as individuals with being connected to ourselves and going through healings and all of those things. And so I find it absolutely fascinating that just healing itself and relationships is something that so many people are talking about now that like you would never hear conversations around. So I love that more and more men and women are starting to have these conversations, starting to share information, and like they're really realizing, no, no, I want more out of my relationship with myself and I want more out of my relationship with my partner. And I do believe that I can have it and that we don't just have to sacrifice and settle and, put up with stuff that doesn't fulfill us. Right. So I think that's beautiful that you're doing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about a couple of the things. So, first one I want to talk about is boosting the libido. So, I have a conversation with people all the time about like sex drive and mismatched sex drives. And, if you and your partner don't have the same sex drive, that eventually your sexual relationship is going to fail, which then eventually is going to carry over into just your everyday relationship. So, what are some things that people can do when we're talking about boosting libido?
Absolutely. This is such a beautiful conversation. And I'm constantly talking to women about libido and what is libido and how do
Hmm.
how do we work through this? And a lot of times women ask me, has my libido just gone away? Has it flown out of the door? Is it ever coming back? Especially when we're talking to mothers
Mhm.
Because a lot of times after we have a baby, we see the libido go down, and then women are concerned that it's never going to come back. And so, libido is a really important topic. I would say one of the most important things to understand is that there are sometimes medical conditions that can allow you to have a low libido. And so,
Mhm.
for that, I will let the doctors provide advice because that's not my area of expertise. But we do have to understand that most of the time it is not a medical issue. It is an issue of many different factors that we can start to troubleshoot to really figure out, okay, what is the issue here and how can we overcome it? Because most of the time there are issues that can be overcome. So
Mhm.
we have to first understand where this low libido is coming from. That's really step one. We don't want to just start going into like, okay, aphrodisiacs and things like that, right? We want to figure out the root cause of why we have a low libido. And there can
Mhm.
be many different factors. If we have a broken relationship with our partner and there's not trust and there's not safety and there's not communication, we're not going to want to engage in sexual activity with them. If we have in our relationship or in our life an extremely stressful situation, as women, we have to understand that when we are stressed, only about 20% of women want to engage in sex. Because when we are overwhelmed with issues, we are so focused on that issue, we're not thinking about sexual pleasure. In order for
Mhm.
us to have the ultimate sexual pleasure, we need to be relaxed, we need to feel safe. And so if we're stressed, it makes it very difficult for us to be in that environment. So we want to ask ourselves, is it that we are overstressed?
Mhm.
When we are in long-term relationships, we have to understand the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire, right? We get into relationships and, in the beginning in the honeymoon stage, we have this desire to have sex all the time. And so as the relationship goes on, we recognize that that spontaneity doesn't last. We need to invest
Mhm.
in responsive desire, meaning that we're stimulating each other's minds and each other's bodies throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month. It's very difficult for us to go from cold to hot, right? So if we're cleaning the house and we're working a full-time job, we're not it's going to be much more difficult for us to jump into getting hot and steamy and wanting to have sex. We
Mhm.
need to have a bridge of intimacy, of stimulation that allows us to first stimulate our mind and then allow us to feel that safety, that relaxed situation, and then we start to open up the body. So the first thing that we really have to do is understand what is the root cause of my low libido? Where exactly is this coming from? And then we can start to implement different solutions to overcome those specific issues.
Yeah. I love that you pointed out about the mental stimulation throughout the day, throughout the week. I've always said that it's so key and important. Like, I mean, even in, let's just say, like, not just relationships, but let's just say, even in a casual relationship, if, say, like a person you're with, they know that they're going to come over tonight. It's not just literally you're walking through my door at 9 o'clock and, I'm ready and, ready to go. But build that up throughout the day. It starts with like the message in the morning. It starts with, I can't wait to see you tonight. That starts with like that flirty little feeling of like somebody's desiring you. Like it's that implanted of seeds throughout the day or throughout the week that make the huge difference for when it comes time to actually being intimate with your partner. And sometimes I think guys forget how important for a woman those things are because of the fact that we do so many things in a day, especially taking care of kids, cleaning, working, cooking. And when you have this mental list of everything you need to do in the day, and flirting and sex hasn't even been a conversation, and then when somebody walks in and it's like, "Oh, aren't you ready?" It's like, "Can I have 20 minutes to maybe like, okay, quickly, let me pull up something on my phone that does like, make me kind of think about it." But I don't think guys realize how important those little things are. And even for a girl to send it to to their partner, to their husband, to their lover. It's just, I'm thinking about you. I can't wait to see you tonight. I've been, all of those little things just to let that person know that, like, that intimate feeling of connection that you're looking to explore with them. Right. So I love that you pointed that out because I don't think, a lot of men realize how critical that is, especially as we get older and we have bigger lists and we have more responsibilities. And Sometimes I do think age can start to affect our libido and our sex drive when women hit, over a certain age. So I think sometimes that mental aspect becomes so much more important to be adding in there a little bit more consistently for, having that setting. But yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really important to understand that women are storytellers. We
Mhm.
say that men are visual creatures, that they love to look at, the
Mhm.
curves of a woman's body and, the way that she's dressed and things like that. Well, women are storytellers. We enjoy a good story. This is why we love reading erotica, right? Because we
Mhm.
love that prolonged excitement of creating this scenario in our minds. We have to stimulate the mind.
Yeah.
Even when we have orgasm, it comes from the mind, right? And so we really need to make sure that we are stimulating that mind, that the idea of sex is very exciting for us. We also have to understand the science, because I think a lot of times have we forget that women's sexuality is a new subject of conversation. We haven't always been talking about this, because for
Mhm.
so many years women's sexuality was something that wasn't even important. It wasn't even something on the table. We didn't talk about it, we didn't discuss it. It was this
Mhm.
very taboo thing. And so we have to recognize the science and what is happening when we have sex. So one of the really fascinating things that I've learned when I studied women's sexuality and sexuality in general is that the average couple is having sex between 7 and 14 minutes. And some people would say, well, that sounds like a good enough time. But we have to recognize that the
Mhm.
average woman takes about 30 to 45 minutes to get fully aroused.
Mhm.
So when we have this kind of idea of, you've seen it on TV, I'm sure you've seen it on YouTube clips of like, not tonight, honey, I have a headache, or I don't feel like it, I'm tired,
Mhm.
right? And women get this reputation of not actually enjoying sex, not wanting sex, that sex is something that, men need and men crave. Well, women actually enjoy sex just as much as men.
Mhm.
Women have just as much pleasure from sex as men. But the problem is, if you are, as a man, if you are reaching that full arousal and you're going through this experience and you're having this beautiful orgasm and you're completely satisfied, but your female counterpart hasn't even begun to get, fully aroused, and then the sex
Mhm.
is over. Right? So if you're having sex for 7 to 14 minutes and it takes me 30 minutes to get fully aroused, then I'm not even really truly engaged. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want more of that, right? And so it's
Mhm.
not that women don't enjoy sex. We just want to be able to experience the full pleasure of sex, which usually does take time. It takes
Mhm.
time, it takes stimulation. It also takes understanding women's sexuality and how the body works. So many couples are having penetration as their main act, right? We say foreplay is a little bit of kissing, a little bit of rubbing, and then we get to sort of the main act, which is penetration. We have to understand that most women do not have orgasms through penetration. So this is accounting for, the up to 80% of women who are faking orgasms. If
Yep.
you are having sex and you think that this is what is turning me on, and I'm too shy to say anything, or I feel too, ashamed to say anything, but it's actually the wrong way to get me to reach orgasm. If I am having this sort of mediocre experience again and again and again and again and again, I'm going to be like, you know what? I'm tired. I'd rather
Yeah.
sleep. I'd rather watch a movie. It's just not that interesting to me. It's just not that pleasurable to me. So eventually it will start to dwindle, and we won't want it as much anymore.
Yeah.
So we
Well,
have
then
to
it feels
really
like a
understand.
chore, right? Like it
Hmm.
feels like a task that you have to do for somebody else that they're enjoying to the full extreme. And in your mind, you're like, oh, you just get me kind of riled up. But then it's like, I got to go finish myself off anyways. So it's kind of that whole like, why bother? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially when you're in a relationship and you love someone, a lot
Hmm.
of times women feel the duty of giving their partner sex. For so long of our history, this was our job. It was to cook, clean, and provide sexual
Hmm.
favors for our partner. Again, we weren't focusing on our sexuality and our pleasure for so long. So as a woman, we feel that it's our duty to provide the sexual satisfaction. And if I'm just not really enjoying it, if, again, if I'm not reaching those orgasms, if I'm not fully engaged, if there's not
Mhm.
that stimulation, and then we go straight to penetration, 7 minutes later, the sex is done, no wonder why I don't want it anymore, you know? And
Yeah.
so women's sexuality is such a beautiful, beautiful, erotic, pleasurable experience if we learn how to do it right
Right.
in relationships. Even if it is casual sex, but especially in relationships, it requires lots of communication. It requires talking about what are your turn ons and how do you turn yourself on, and how
Mhm.
do we talk about sex. So many couples find it very difficult to talk about sex. They can have sex, but to actually discuss it, we become very shy and very shameful, and very
Mhm.
afraid of what will my partner think and what will my partner say. And so we have a lot of way to go when it comes to this, but I am glad, this podcast, for example, it's giving that
Mhm.
space for conversation, and taking the taboo out of the subject so that we can really get down to the point of having sex, which is a pleasurable experience.
Yeah.
I talk all the time about how sex is not something you do for your partner. It's not something you give to your partner. It's a pleasurable, erotic experience of pleasure that you have with them. And so, in
Mhm.
order to maximize that for both people, we need to be communicating. We need to be experimenting. We need to be exploring. We need to be researching and remembering that it's all about fun and it's all about pleasure.
So do you think though a huge aspect of that, because like you said, I mean, like if a woman takes about, let's say 25 to 45 minutes to kind of even be fully aroused, I mean, most relationships now, I feel like when they've had children and people are working, they get into this quick mindset of like, oh, let's just quickly do it and get it over with. At least then we can say we did it for the week, check it off of our to-do list and say we were intimate. But like really, it is an experience, and it's an experience that both people deserve to, fully be able to enjoy, but with time. Like, like I know some people schedule it and whatnot or plan it, but I really do feel like it's like if you have the time that you're going to set aside to be intimate together, to make it, an hour long experience, to be able to commit to giving each other that time of exploration, of, building and the foreplay and all of those things. And realistically, I feel like as a woman, the times that I've had amazing, sex where it's just like you fully feel like you've achieved all the different types of pleasure and feelings and sensations. I mean, yeah, okay, you probably had an hour to 2 hours, but I mean, then I don't feel like I need it every day for quick 5 minutes when I have this experience that feels so fulfilling and so connected and so intimate. It takes away from the pressure of feeling like I have to do it multiple times throughout the week for 7 minutes, 10 minutes. And I feel like the guys would almost kind of feel the same, right? It's like because you had this big, beautiful, long experience that you guys got to be present with each other, and that actually carries forward and would mean more compared to those 2 3 5 7 minute little sessions throughout, say a week, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we really have to think about what is the vision for our sex lives. When we want to create thriving relationships, when we want to create thriving lives, we really have to be specific about what is the vision, what is the goal. So we have
Mhm.
to consciously create. If we feel that sexual intimacy is something that is important to us, then we have to make time for it. We have to talk about what is this going to look like for us. We have to put it on the table. For me, I think that a quickie is a luxury we get when we have built that foundation for amazing sex and sexual intimacy. So
Mhm.
once you carve out that hour or hour and a half or however much of time, it takes you to learn each other, to explore, to really get down that intimacy, then a quickie is something that you can pop in every now and again because you
Mhm.
understand those pleasure centers. But it really just depends on how much you want to invest in your sex life. If
Mhm.
you say that sex is something that's just there, it's just there because you feel that's what two adults do, then by all means, have it 4 times a week for 7 minutes. But if you
Mhm.
feel that sex is something that strengthens the bond in your relationship, it's this experience of ultimate pleasure. It's this experience of being able to relax and let go and explore with your partner, then you are going to have to carve out that time. The same
Mhm.
way if you want six pack abs, you have to go to the gym, you have to exercise, you have to eat well, you have to invest that time. Anything we care about requires time and effort. If you care
Mhm.
about your children, you take the time to feed them and bathe them and nurture
Yeah.
them, right? And so if you care about the relationship that you have with your partner and you care about the sex that you have to nurture it and it takes time. But it's not supposed to be this extremely stressful situation where it's
Mhm.
like, okay, we have to have sex for an hour and a half because, I heard this podcast and this woman said we have to.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, it's kind of like telling you like you have to go on vacation, right? It shouldn't be a
Yeah.
stressful situation. It should be fun and it should be exciting. So we want to make sure that we're connecting with that value of sexual intimacy, which is the fun, the play, the pleasure. And so then we find the time for it, and I
Mhm.
agree with you 100%. It's better to start off at least when we're in this creation stage. It's much better to
Mhm.
start off with saying, we're going to have sex once a month, but we're going to carve out 2 or 3 hours for it.
Mhm.
And then as you go along and you start to say, okay, we can find more time, then I would start, cutting it down and having it more frequently. But you want to
Right.
give yourself that time of, we're not tired,
Mhm.
we've been connecting, we've been building up that responsive desire. So we've been flirting, we've been talking, we've been touching, we've been teasing, we've been doing all of those things to stimulate the mind, to stimulate the body, to create that intimacy. And then we have this time that we've carved out where we're feeling good, we're well rested, we had
Mhm.
all the time to relax and stuff like that so that we can show up and we can invest in this time for play.
Yeah. Well, and I think too sometimes when like I mean anytime even with guys that I've dated and I say like, like, "Oh, okay, like, we'll make a night of it." And they're like, "Well, I can't, you know. You think I can have sex or keep it hard on for 2, 3 hours?" It's like, "No, no, 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 no." Nobody's saying about penetration for 2 or 3 hours, but lay together in a bed, have conversation that feels meaningful, flirting, whether you have a bath together, have a glass of wine together, play like but it's like you're just connecting. You are agreeing to put away the phone, agreeing to put away the TV, and agreeing to focus on each other's needs, whether it's verbal, physical. I mean, there's the massage oils, there's the candles, feathers. Like you can play with different sensations and try different things. But it's like that's the part where it's like, yeah, okay, we'll make a night of it of curiosity of like, hey, does this feel good for you when I touch you here? Rub your back this way, like have you checked into these things or let's talk about something, look online maybe at some different toys we want to try together. Like it's that whole, building up of it. And then once you've been connected for so long, it's just like, yeah, once you get to like the part, like you said, of penetration and stuff, you already feel like everything else is just kind of like set in and you're enjoying it in a different way. But yeah, I always hear guys say they're like, well, who can fuck for 2 hours? It's like, no. Sex and intimacy just isn't about that part. It's about everything else. And even for a guy of discovering, different places on their body that, they find that that feels good or, a different kind of erogenous zone that they're like, "Oh, I didn't even realize that I would like that." But just being open-minded to exploring together, right?
Absolutely. And I would say that this is something that most people would be open to
Mhm.
if they allow the conversation to
Yeah.
start. Because most people are very, very ignorant when it comes to sex. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of the history that we've had when it comes to sex, a lot of the taboos that we have,
Mhm.
a lot of mainstream porn, it really limits our ability to understand exactly what sex is and all of the amazing things that we can explore in sex. And as you said, most people believe that there are sort of 5 acts when it comes to sex. I go down on you,
Mhm.
you go down on me, we kiss, we hug, and we have penetration.
Mhm.
And they think that's it, and no wonder why people are getting bored and they're having less sex, because who wants to
Mhm.
do that 5 times a week for 50 years? I mean, it's really
Yeah.
boring. And so I think, you know, it's it's something that is so beautiful because if you bring this conversation up, I would say that most people are open to it. They're
Mhm.
open to exploring, they're open to opening their minds as to what sex can be. They're open to trying new things, having new sensations. Again, this is about adding pleasure. You obviously don't have to do everything, and I think it's
Mhm.
really important to go through that list of things that you are open to try, those things that you would never in a million years do, but really open your mind and start to learn. YouTube videos are great, podcasts are great, books are great because they give you options. We have to stop being penetration obsessed because it's
Mhm.
not working for men and it's definitely not working for women. And we have to stop using that as the main event. When we say sexual intimacy is about everything equally, the kissing, the feather play,
Yeah.
you can start to get into some bondage if you're into that. There's just so many different things that we can explore.
Yeah.
And once we say that everything is equal, we start to have such a more pleasurable experience. One of the when we're talking about libido and people say, "Ugh, I don't feel like it." What they're talking about is I don't feel like having penetration, right? Because
Mhm.
maybe they're tired or they just aren't in the mood for that. But again, when we open up the experience of what sex is, we can say I say to my audience, I say I have sex with my husband every single day. And they're like, "Who has time for that?" And I'm like, "But let
Mhm.
me explain to you what sex is." It doesn't mean that it has to be penetration. It can just be the caressing, the sexual, touch, the sexual play, the intimacy of so many different things. It doesn't have to be penetration. And so when you open up the idea of what sex is, you can have sex every day. It simply
Mhm.
means that you connect on a sexual level with your partner. It can be 5 minutes, it can be an hour, it can be 3 hours, it can be 3 days. Again, when you're not believing that sex just equals penetration, you can have sex every day. And what it also does is it invests in that responsive desire. Because if my husband just fondles me, for 5 minutes in the morning, then I'm thinking about him for the rest of the day, right? Because I've gotten warmed up, and maybe we'll have 15 minutes of play at the end of the night. And then the next day, so every day there's just
Yeah.
a little bit of something just to keep that connection, to keep that arousal. And it's such a beautiful experience because you're connecting sexually without the pressure of having to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and I love that because I feel like so many people in relationships and marriages after, like you said, the years and years of, not wanting to and not wanting to satisfy and feeling like it's a chore, it really is because the connection is missing. You go through for so long believing, like you said, that sex means penetration and I have to do this. And I love what you said about just 5 minutes, even in the morning, just even if it's just a quick kiss or the touching and the petting, knowing that there's no pressure and expectation that if he touches you, that it means that you now have to touch him and you have to give him an orgasm or help him finish, right? But just knowing that it's just no, it's just about connecting and it's just about keeping that intimacy kind of alive. And then communicating about when you do want to maybe, have penetrative sex, like you said, right? But not every time you touch that's what it means. And I think women, we start to over years get in this like, oh, he's touching me, fuck, he's gonna want it, I'm so not in the mood, I didn't even shower like yet, like, oh, the timing, like, why does he always do this at the worst timing? And it's like that is what it becomes, is like, I know he wants sex when he's come home and grabbed my butt, and I better, give it to him at the end of the day. But knowing that you can have these physical, moments together of caressing without it having to mean that. It's just a way to stay connected with your partner, which I think long term is probably a huge key to a successful, happy relationship. But people stop communicating, like you said, right? And so I think communicating about sex, communicating about what your intentions are. If, say, you were going up and giving your partner a hug or a kiss or saying something nice, that it's not always because there's an expectation for them to do something with it. It's just because you still want to show them love, affection, and, respect and desire for them and make them feel special, right? Which long term, I think, really can sustain a couple.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
It's really important to have that communication. And again, there's so many couples that struggle with communication when it comes to sex because this
Mhm.
is a new topic. This is a
Yeah.
new topic on the table. Before it was like, you're a wife, you have to give your husband sex. It's about him, it's not about you.
Mhm.
And now we're starting to voice ourselves and have these conversations that we haven't really had before. I
Yeah.
think it's really important, especially when it comes to the quality of the sex, for you to have that communication. As I said
Mhm.
before, up to 80% of women are faking orgasms. There is a real problem when it comes to communication, because why women are faking it and why men don't know the difference, that,
Mhm.
that is an issue of communication. A lot of women, for one, have the belief that every woman except for her is having an orgasm, that every woman except for her is having a vaginal orgasm. So there's a lot of misbeliefs, and there's a lot of things that women are bringing to the table when they have sex, like shame and
Mhm.
different kinds of traumas and different kinds of issues and different blockages that they have with their partner because they've been fighting, or because they haven't created that safe space. And so women are just like, you know what, I'm just gonna make him happy again
Mhm.
by pretending that I had this amazing pleasure that I didn't have. And a lot of times what happens is, if you do it once, you're going to continue to do it
Mhm.
forever. Right? Because if you
Right.
don't have an orgasm, your partner is going to say, "Oh, what happened this time?" So if you fake
Mhm.
it once, you have to fake it forever. And
Yeah.
it's really important for women to feel comfortable and confident within themselves to say, even if they say, "I've never had an orgasm with someone," or "I've never had an orgasm at all." And then the question becomes, okay, so what do we do to move towards that without putting too much pressure? How do we move and how do we explore in order for that to become something that comes naturally? And so
Right.
there's a lot of women who are silent when it comes to the reality that they're not actually having orgasms. And when it comes to men, there's a mix as well. If you're a man who's been with women, when I was dating, let me tell you how many men I've had this conversation with that said, "Oh, well, every woman I've had sex with has had a real
Mhm.
orgasm. Every single time, every woman." And I'm like, 80% are faking it, but none with you. And so men are in the dark as well. Women were such great actresses, apparently, that these men are believing.
Absolutely, we are. The amount of times, I mean, I can't even. Yes, you're right. Men are nope, you can tell. You can tell the shaking, you can tell this, you can, and I'm like, "No, no, no, honey, that can be faked as well. Let me tell you, the convulsions, the everything, we learn that stuff, we nail it for you. We do that for you, but really it's taking away from our experience of what we do deserve to get out of, a sexual experience as well." So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And
mhm.
and it really requires men to be patient, to be
Mhm.
understanding, and to be open to change. A
Yeah.
lot of times the ego gets in the way from the man allowing the woman to feel this pleasure, because he thinks, well, if she doesn't have an orgasm, it means that what I'm
Mhm.
doing is wrong. And I've been doing this for 30, 40, 50 years, so it must be right.
Yeah.
And, having that person who is open and vulnerable and willing to listen and willing to experiment and willing to learn. There's a lot of men out here who really need to learn about the female body. They need to know
Mhm.
where the clitoris is. They need to know, how to touch women and how to pleasure them. And that requires a lot of vulnerability on the man's part to say,
Yeah.
maybe I don't know everything. Maybe my mimicking of porn isn't the best idea. Maybe there's
Mhm.
something else out there. There's a different way to allow women to experience pleasure. And so
Mhm.
it requires vulnerability on both sides, and for both people to put their egos away in order for them to create this safe space for each other for exploration. But I promise you, if anyone is listening and they're thinking, well, maybe I'll do this, but I'm a little scared, I promise you, once you do, not only will
Mhm.
your sex life change, but your whole life will change. Because
Yeah.
when you have authentic sexual pleasure, your whole life changes. The way that
Yeah.
you show up to work, the way that you interact with other people, like, we all know how powerful sex is. And when it's authentic and the connection that you have with your partner becomes ridiculously authentic, that
Mhm.
excitement, that love, it's just overpouring and overflowing. And it's such an amazing, a powerful tool for you to use in your relationship if you
Yeah,
use it in the right way, not
totally.
faking, not giving it as a gift or giving it as a service, but you're authentically both experiencing this pleasure. It's life changing.
I love that you said that. And I really do think that when women truly are sexually satisfied and like full body, mentally, sexually satisfied, the way that we show up in general for everything is just so much different. Like, I have girlfriends, and it's funny that they'll say to me sometimes, like if I have a day where it's just like I'm being overly nice to them or something, they're like, "Oh, she's on a dick high." Like they're like, "Take advantage of it, ride it until like it's been a while, because she'll go back to being like, hypercritical of us and judging us for our bad decisions. So like ride out her niceness." Well, and it's just like I thought of it, I was like, they're not wrong. The next day after that I've had like these amazing experiences, it's just like, yeah, like you have nothing but love and happiness because your body just feels these endorphins, for a longer period of time. And so, yeah, I always kind of joke with them about that, but it's so true, right? It really is one of those things. Okay, let's talk about this briefly then. The closing the orgasm gap. What does that mean? How do men and women achieve that together? Like, what is it that that looks like if somebody was really trying to think about how to close that orgasm gap?
First of all, I growing up, I had no idea what the heck an orgasm gap was. I mean, I
Hmm.
obviously never heard of it. It's nothing
Hmm.
that people talk about. I think, most of the world probably still doesn't understand what's going on. So, let's clarify what that is. So, it basically says that heterosexual men are having the most orgasms and heterosexual women are having the least amount of orgasms. So, when
Hmm.
heterosexual men and women have sex, there's a huge difference between the amount of orgasms slash pleasure we're experiencing. And so, how do we close this? How do we allow both partners in heterosexual relationships to have the same amount of pleasure? The first thing is we have to become aware. So, awareness is key. Education is key. People have to understand that this is happening. And we have to allow for conversation to happen. We need it to happen on the mass scale, having podcasts like this, talking about it
Hmm.
on TV shows. I saw there was this one TV show about pleasure, and they were saying, and this woman said so beautifully, if you were going to a restaurant and your partner got this like Michelin star tasting menu with like wine pairing and exotic cheeses and all of this stuff, and you were served like two crackers.
Hmm.
And that was, day after day after day. Eventually, you would say, like, I'm never going to this restaurant again, right? Because why does he get this and I get that? Like, that's not fair. And so, it's really important that we are talking about it, that we're aware of what's going on. And how do we close it? We teach men and we guide men to be extremely empathetic, to understand that, again, it's not that women don't enjoy sex. Women enjoy it. We want it just as much as men, but we
Hmm.
need it in the right way. We need to have the same pleasure, we need to have the same experience. And so men need to be very empathetic to the female experience and understand that it's not only going to allow her to have more pleasure, but also
Hmm.
him, right? Because there's a difference between having sex with a woman who isn't really into it and she's not fully enjoying herself, and a woman
Hmm.
who's like 100% just can't get enough. That's a very different
Yeah.
experience for him as well. So understanding that it requires men to learn about the female body, to learn about the female experience, to make sure that he creates that safe space with her, that he communicates with her, that he asks the right questions, that he allows her to guide him, to teach him, to go on this journey together. And then it
Hmm.
requires women to create a safe space for themselves to vocalize, you know, first of all, stop faking orgasms, as difficult
Hmm.
as it may be. Again, you may have been doing it for 20 years. Today is the day to say, listen, honey, I'm so sorry. I have to tell you something. We have
Yeah.
to just, we just have to do it. We have to rip that band-aid off and say no more faking it, because it's a disadvantage to you and it's a disadvantage to him. So
Yeah.
no more faking it. Create the safe space. If you don't have a safe space in your relationship, you don't have a relationship.
Yeah.
So if we don't have a safe space for communication, we need to make sure that we do that anyway, outside of sex. So once we do that outside of sex, then we bring that safe space, that communication in sex, and we start from the beginning. We start from
Yeah.
the beginning of what is erotic to me? How do I turn myself on? What feels good? What what is the way that I enjoy my partner to touch me? Make sure that we are spending at least that 30 to 40 minutes, especially in the beginning, to allow ourselves to not put that stress. Heterosexual men, when you're having sex with women, you know, don't ask her, "Are you close? Are you close? Are you gonna come?" Like, it puts way too much pressure, right?
Mhm.
So we need to just allow it to happen, if it will happen, when it will happen, right? Just there's so many things that we can do, and if we just add in one thing today, one thing tomorrow, we just start to move in that direction, it will start to close that gap. And when we close that gap, it's beautiful for women and it's
Mhm.
beautiful for men and it's beautiful for the planet, because the more
Yeah.
orgasms everyone's having, the less stressed people are going to be, the less sick people are going to be, the less angry people are going to be. Exactly what you said. When someone cuts you off in traffic, you're just going to be like, okay, it's fine, right? Because you're
Right?
going to be so bubbly, like, who cares? you know
Yeah.
those mean bosses out there that's like always yelling at people, let that person have incredible sex the night before.
Yeah.
The next day they're going to come in and like buy coffee and donuts for everyone. The world
Yeah.
really will be a better place if we get
Oh, it's so true, and I mean, like, let's be real, that's what people always say, they're like, "Oh, she's miserable. Oh, she needs to get laid." Right? Like, it's the first thing
this.
people say when somebody is kind of, like, intense and uptight. It's like, "Oh, she must it's been a while since she's, had some good dick or something." So, it's obviously the first thing that comes to people's mind when somebody is just so grouchy or, not happy. So, I agree. I do really think that if men and women were really in a place of receiving, pleasure in a different way, in a different level, that it really does change how they interact with everybody, themselves, family, friends, work, everything. I just think people are happier when they feel like when they feel like they're being seen, when they're being heard, when, they're allowed to be open, they can communicate. Communication is such a huge thing in relationships, in sexual relationships, and you would think at this point that there would be something. I don't know, like, communication is one of the things that they say is the foundation of a breakdown of all relationships. And yet it's so crazy how hard and how much we all know this, and yet it's still so hard for us to ask for what we need in that way of feeling like somebody and our own partner isn't going to judge us for voicing our needs. They're not going to judge us for expressing something that we might want to try that maybe, we've never tried before, or, the jealousies and the insecurities I think that do come up in a man and woman's mind when somebody brings out, hey, you know what? Like, I know we've been doing this for a while, but could we try this? And it's right away of like, I've been doing something wrong for a very long time, or why would she want me to switch this? And like, like, and I think it's like that panic, that internal panic that, we haven't been doing something right for so long and a person is unhappy with what we've been doing, but really it's just because we waited so long to say something. That one thing that they might be really into that we haven't been into for 10 years, we've been allowing them to do it because we wanted to please them for 10 years. And it's just really one of those things where it's like, no, this has never worked. And again, I've just pretended and I've said that it works because I saw how much you liked it, but again, it's the woman's natural need to please. We carry that so heavily to people please, to people please our partner, especially to not rock the boat, to just let things kind of go, and then to carry it and deal with it on our own silently afterwards, which, I mean, not really silently. We just go to our girlfriends or a therapist or
This.
whoever and we complain and we bitch and we say that all these things are wrong. And again, it's the first thing is like, well, have you said anything to him? No, so
Mhm.
it's crazy how big of a difference that makes to be able to feel, like you said, safe in your relationship to communicate the things that you need. And if you don't have that, what kind of a relationship is it really? You know?
Absolutely. There are very specific foundational pieces to successful relationships that need to be in place.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you don't have a successful relationship. I say people can be living together, they can share finances, they can have children, but it doesn't mean that they have a relationship. So we
Hmm.
really have to understand that in order to have a successful relationship, You need very specific things, and communication is one of those. You have to be able to communicate about anything. I don't care if
Mhm.
my husband tells me something that I absolutely hate or something that really, really bothers me. He has the safe space to say it. He
Mhm.
understands that no matter what it is, he never feels like, oh my God, what is she going to say? What is she going to do? Because that space is there. That safe space is there. And whatever it is, we'll navigate it. Whatever it is, we'll go through it. Whatever it is, we'll
Mhm.
fix it. So when we have sex with our partner, that is an expression of sexual intimacy. And sexual intimacy is an expression of all the other intimacies we have in our relationship. So when we have sex with our partner, we're expressing the emotional intimacy that is outside of sex. We're
Mhm.
expressing the intellectual intimacy that's outside of sex. We're expressing the physical intimacy and the spiritual intimacy. So if we are not having this communication in sex, it means that we also don't communicate effectively outside of sex. We might be able to talk about things, but we're not
Mhm.
communicating, which is a deeper level issue.
Ah.
So we have to be able to create a space where we say, I could come to my partner and say absolutely anything. Now, they may not like it. It may be a conversation. We might have to navigate through it. Just because I say to my partner, this is something I would really enjoy in sex, doesn't mean that they have to do it, but we can absolutely
Mhm.
talk about it. We can research, we can have a discussion, we can
Mhm.
explore, we can maybe find an alternative or something similar, right? But everything is on the table to discuss because at the end of the day, this is all about creating a happy connection with someone else. In order to be happy, we need to communicate. People think
Mhm.
people think of communication as this really tedious act, like, oh, we have to talk about everything. And, I don't want to talk about it. But when we understand that communication is a tool to get what we want, it is a way to get what we want. We want to
Mhm.
communicate because when we communicate effectively, we get what we want. So we want to communicate if we learn how to do it. A lot of times
Yeah.
couples don't communicate effectively. And so they have the same conversation over and over again, or they bring something to the table and there's that defensiveness, that criticism, it turns into a fight. So if you don't know how to communicate effectively, of course, it's going to be draining. It's going to be
Right.
something you're going to try to steer away from. But when we learn that, this is a safe space, we can talk about anything, we can, navigate anything, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
great. If there's an idea, if there's something that I want to try, something I want to talk about, something that's working or something that's not working, I can go ahead and tell my partner because we can talk about absolutely anything.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I love that, right? And it really is about the effective communication. Okay, so I want to ask you then. So I know you had kind of, when I was like going through some stuff that we're going to talk about, I want to talk about the power couple secrets to thriving sex lives. So is this kind of, I know we've been talking a lot about communication and stuff, but let's move more to, I guess, the actual focus on the power couple and for the people in relationships that are, in a little bit of a different type.
Absolutely. So I want to identify for people what is a power couple, because I know a lot
Mhm.
of times this term is used when we're talking about like Angelina and Brad and all these
Yeah.
famous people, and people are like, I don't want to be famous. I'm like, you don't have to be. So a power couple is basically a couple that is deeply in love and successfully navigates their relationship. So it's a couple that uses the power of their relationship to create a life that they love. They have that effective communication. They have a problem solving technique in their relationship. They create that safe space where they can talk about anything, go through anything. So they have the fundamental pieces of having a very strong, healthy, high functioning relationship. So how do power couples have amazing sex lives? Well,
Mhm.
first of all, they invest in their relationship, the relationship outside of sex. They make sure that they have a problem solving technique. They make sure that they have that communication. They make sure that they're practicing interdependence. Because when you have a healthy, high functioning relationship, it's going to be much easier to have a high functioning sex life, right? If we can
Mhm.
talk about anything, we can also talk about sex. If we create a safe space in our relationship for everything, we then have a safe space when it comes to sex. So we want to invest in all of those things to create a beautiful relationship, and it will then translate into sex. Power couples also understand, as we talked about before, that sex does not equal
Mhm.
penetration, that sex is sex and sexual intimacy is about creating this space of pleasure. How do we touch? How do we speak? How do we,
Yeah.
flirt? How do we do all of these things? And we're making sure that we are investing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis into erotica. How do I tease my partner? How do I touch my partner? How am I learning about new things? You know, from a personal experience, I used to think that BDSM was this thing that really weird, crazy people did. They dressed up in latex and like whipped each other. I was like, never in a million years. Like, that's for freaks, geeks,
Mhm.
and weirdos. I would never. Right? Until 50 Shades of Grey came out, and I started to think, I personally didn't love the movie, but it did get me thinking. And
Yeah.
I think it got a lot of people thinking of let me just look at this another time, right? And so I went online and I went to research about BDSM, and I realized that there's so many different ways that people practice. It's not just one thing. It can be whatever
Mhm.
you want. And so I found this woman, Evie Lupine, and the way that she explained BDSM, I was like, oh, but this is actually very different than what I thought. This is actually really beautiful and connective. And it's about creating spaces of trust and communication
Mhm.
and enhancing all of those things that I love about relationships in the first place. And so I allowed myself to explore and to research. And then when I met my husband, we started to talk about it and explore it and research. So it's about having an open mind and saying, what are we at least willing to talk about? What are
Yeah.
we willing to research? What are we willing to experiment with? Because again, this is about sexual exploration and pleasure. The more open minded we are to at least have a conversation, the more toys
Mhm.
we get to play with, the more, places we get to go. And it's like being a little kid, and you just have all these different games that you play, right? And so this is our way of playing with our partner, and we want to be open as much as possible to put everything on the table and say, okay, let's start to go through this and at least start to have
Yeah.
conversations. And anything that you see, whether it's BDSM or any kind of other kink play or anything that's sort of outside of the quote unquote norm, I would say one of the things that power couples do is, because they are extremely open minded, is they see something and say, okay, is this something interesting to me? And
Mhm.
if it's interesting, is there a way that I can apply it to my relationship? So again, you don't have to look at BDSM and say, oh, well, everyone wears latex, so I have to wear latex.
Mhm.
Well, of course not. You can take some aspects. This is a perfect place to pick and choose what you like and throw away what you don't like. There's
Right.
not one way to practice anything. So even if you say, I don't necessarily like role play, but I like that one teeny tiny part of role play. We'll just
Mhm.
take that one teeny tiny part. It's like a candy store, like, and everything's free. So just take
Yeah.
anything you want, from
Yeah.
any kind of play, because it's all about making it your own.
Yeah.
So it's that open-mindedness, that exploration, that communication. You have to just have fun with it. And you have fun with it when you feel safe, when you feel
Yeah.
seen, when you feel respected, when you feel understood, when you
Yeah.
feel cared for, right? If I
Yeah.
feel like my partner really truly cares for me, is paying attention to me, we're deeply, deeply connected, that's when I can just let go. I can sit back, let go, and just allow myself to experience all these amazing
Mm.
moments of pleasure.
Yeah, it's so true, right? And I love that you brought up BDSM and like kinks and things like that because I think that people are very curious about, let's say, different fetishes or kinks or even like the BDSM stuff. But you're right, they have this very like tunnel vision idea of what that means and what they've seen and what they've been exposed to, where they've seen it. And they just right away think, like, no, why would I want to do that? However, with proper research and I think with understanding the psychology behind some of these kinks and fetishes and BDSM of what it can do for you or why people are drawn to it, really then opens your mind a little bit more to being curious to see if it's something that would work for you. And I've talked to a lot of different people when it comes to, say, the BDSM stuff and that whole pain pleasure stuff and the actual healing benefits it can have sometimes for women who have been through traumatic experiences or past traumas and stuff, and like that that practice can actually on your body, on your mind, have a healing effect. But again, it's being with somebody that you feel safe to go through those experiences with, and having that trust and having the communication of like, hey, we tried this and this is what it made me start to think, and I started to panic, and knowing that your partner is there to support you through whatever comes up through the experience so that you do feel safe to continue to try. And but I think sometimes with those things, it's like right away we think of it as something aggressive. When we think of BDSM or kinks and fetishes, we think that they have to be aggressive, which then as a woman, why would you want to, when when you're trying to discover something for yourself, why do we want to put ourselves in aggressive situations where we don't feel safe and we don't feel respected, or you feel like somebody's going to take something too far? But again, it's that slowing down, and I think 50 Shades of Grey was big on showing that aspect of it, that it could be softer, that it could be more sensual, and that it could have trust, and you could slow down and you could communicate and have consent as you go for discovering these things about yourself, of what you are into or what you're not into. But it's from what you're taught of what you think compared to the reality of what it actually can be is usually so different, right?
Absolutely. And it's really important to do your research and have
Mhm.
conversations
Yeah,
before practicing any of this. I've heard a lot of
totally.
women say that BDSM is abuse. And
Mhm.
I do believe that some people are in abusive relationships and then use the title of BDSM to sort of
Yeah.
mask the abuse. It's 100% abuse if it's abuse,
Yeah.
what regardless of what people call it. But BDSM within itself is not abuse because we're
Yeah.
talking about consent. We're talking about
Yeah.
respect, and being with someone that you trust, and you have to create that safe space before you actually practice. And so when we're talking about BDSM in relationships, as you said, it doesn't have to be anything painful. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
anything, strong. It can be very soft. It can be very gentle because it's not about the pain that you inflict on someone. It's not about,
Mhm.
as we see in the movies, the whips and the chains. It's
Yeah.
more about the power dynamic. And a lot of times, again, another misunderstanding is that the dominant has all the power and control and the pleasure, and people are like, why would you want to be a submissive? Like, why would you want to serve
Mhm.
someone? Me myself, I am a submissive, and my husband is a dominant. And I can tell you right now, I feel like he has the short end of the stick. Like,
Mm.
people think that submissives do, but I'm just like, but my position is like super cozy because
Mhm.
I'm the one who submits to the safety of the space that he has for me. And it's for me, it's just such a relaxing place to be, where he, as the dominant, he's the one who I feel that he has to do more,
Mhm.
but actually he would say the reverse. So it works for us. So we found our positions. But again, when you have the relationship to support kink, it then becomes a benefit to the relationship.
Right.
It basically highlights all of the beautiful things that you have. It highlights the effective communication that we have. It highlights the safe space that we've created. It
Right.
highlights the love that we have for each other and the deep connection that we have. It's just a way to express that. It's a game at the end of the day. It's a way that you play, it's a way that you communicate. And it's really just about finding what are those things that, again, stimulate your mind. For me,
Mhm.
BDSM is much more about the mental stimulation. The physical is amazing, but it first starts with a mental stimulation. There's a lot of BDSM practices that we have that don't involve anything physical. They're just mental games. They're the way that we speak to each other and things like that. And so, at the end of the day, you really have to think that sex is a pleasurable experience between two
Mhm.
people. And when it's in a relationship, it's a pleasurable experience between two people in love. How do we
Yeah.
play? How do we have fun? How do we experience pleasure? We want to
Mhm.
be focused on the pleasure aspect, the aspect of strengthening the bond in the relationship, strengthening the relationship in the physical space, in the mental space, in the spiritual space, in the intellectual
Yeah.
space. and really remembering that it's about fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I love that. And I love that we were able to kind of, talk about that to some degree because I think that people don't realize the power that some of these other things can have if if they bring it into the relationship and they're open to it. So I love that we kind of dabbled on that, and I really do think we could completely go down a whole conversation talking about BDSM and some of those things. But hopefully, we can do that at another time because I would really love to do a full episode on just BDSM itself. And I mean, if you're, if you're open to it, you and your husband, obviously, that's something that you guys have experienced. So I feel like you could actually probably share a little bit more with people listening, kind of the roles of the sub and the dom and those different things and different tools or different, tips, I guess, for people to curious about that. So I feel like that would be a fun conversation to, dive into on a whole other episode if you're open to that, Riley. I think that would be fun. But
Yes, absolutely. I
yeah.
would.
Okay, perfect. So for everybody listening, where can they find you? Where can they reach out to you on social media? What is the best way for them to get in touch with you if they want to, further, go down this road of exploring and learning and coaching for couples, for individuals, what it is that they can get out of having, somebody help them with these conversations?
So I am on Instagram and Facebook. It's Riley Molinarios. So if you can spell it, you can find me. And I have tons and tons of free tools, free techniques, free resources on my website, RileyMolinario.com. So please come learn, educate yourself, have conversations with your partner. It's
Mhm.
really just about getting that education and then putting those things into practice because we really can have thriving relationships,
Mhm.
thriving lives. It first starts with the education.
Absolutely, and I love that because I do really think that that is huge, and I think education is lacking when it comes to, sex education, healing education, individual personal development for, relationships, education on that as well. So I love that you are actually out there as well, helping people and spreading the message and having these conversations. And so I'm really grateful that you were able to come on today and share with everybody listening, you know, what it is that you can do in your experiences and what it is that you see missing as well, and then the expertise that goes with it from having somebody help people with these conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks everybody for listening, and stay tuned to the next one that we do when we do talk all things BDSM with Riley.